Hello, everyone. This set of videos will discuss the concept of arrays in programming. An array is essentially a list of elements. So the example that I'm going to use in these videos, as well as on the homework assignment, is a list of quiz scores. Before I go any further in the PowerPoint, I will go ahead and open a project in Visio, or excuse me, not Visio, in Visual Studio, so that we can get a running example going. So, File, New Project. I'm going to call this project Quiz Scores. If you're following along, you might notice this looks slightly different. I'm doing this on my old laptop that has the 2015 version instead of 2017 version of Visual Studio, but it should work pretty much just the same. Just the new project window is in a little bit different order, but I'm creating a Windows Forms application, calling it Quiz Scores, and saving it on my desktop. Code folder. Okay. All right. Now we have, now I can switch back and forth between the slides and the example that I'm showing you. Okay, an array, like I said, is a list of data items. Arrays have to have, the items in a single array must be all of the same data type, and they all carry the same name, which is the name of the array. And each item in the array is distinguished from others by what we call an index. So in C#, arrays are objects. They're not just inherent data types like strings and integers and doubles, characters. They are a special object from the class named system.array. And anytime that you create an object in C#, you have to use the new keyword. So you have to not only declare an array, but also create it using the new keyword. So you can see the example on the slide. You declare it by stating the data type, followed by opening and closing square brackets, and then you give the name of your array, and then you give a name to your array. So in this case, we created an array of doubles called sales. We declared it, and then on the next line, we create that by using the new keyword. So sales equals new double array of size 20. The number inside the square brackets is how many items are allowed to be held in that array. Now let me jump back to Visual Studio, and I will show you just another example of an object. So if I were to look at the program.cs file here, you can see that what C# does when it runs an application is this program.cs file is the class that has the main method in it. And this main method tells C# to run a new object of type form1. So really what we've been doing in these chapters when we've created GUI applications, when we create a form, we're actually creating an object in C#. So then when the C# program runs, it tells the computer to create a new object of type form1. Now that's totally beside the point of arrays. I just wanted to show you an example, another example of where the new keyword appears in C# code. Don't edit anything in your program.cs file. So in our application, when we create an array, we have to remember to use the new keyword to create a new array object. Okay, Each object in an array is referred to as an array element, and the elements are numbered with a subscript or index, and these are usually contained within square brackets to indicate what position it is in the array. And just like with everything else in programming, an array's elements are numbered beginning with 0, not by 1. Okay, so the first item in an array is element subscript 0. The second item in an array is element subscript 1, and so forth. Now, array elements you can treat just like any other variables. You can use them just like you've used variables in any of the other chapters that we've done. You just refer to them by the array name and then the subscript in square brackets. So to assign a value to an array element, you can see here the 0th element of sales, or in other words, the first element of sales, the element numbered 0, is assigned a value of 2100. Okay. In the third bullet point, you can see saving an element value to another variable. In this case, you can just see that we've called on the element number 11 of the sales array, and we've used it just like we might use any other variable in place of a number in this calculation. All right. In our quiz scores application, let's add a button and I'm just going to have the text be OK and call it my OK button. And I'm going to add a text box. And I'm going to call that the quiz number text box. And I'll add a label just telling the user what to do. So I'm going to scoot all of these things over. I'm going to have this label's text say, please input a quiz number to see your score. So this is an application that maybe a student would log in and they want to see their score on a certain quiz number, or so they could type in like the number 1 and hit OK if they wanted to see their score for quiz number 1. And I'm going to add one more label down at the bottom. I'm just going to call it output label. And the text I will leave default blank. I'll double click on my OK button to switch over to my code view. Zoom in. Okay, so creating an array. Let's say we want to create an array of quiz scores, and let's say that you could get, like half points on the score. So we'll call it a double instead of an integer. And we'll call it quiz scores. But it's not just a double variable, it's a double array. So you have to put the brackets after the data type. And then you could either do this on a new line, equals a new double, and we're going to give it a size of 11. Let's say there's 11 quizzes in a course. Okay, this is the format that was shown on the slides. You can also combine this into one single line. Like this. Okay, now I will say that a best practice actually, when you're creating an array object, is to actually declare and create it outside of any event methods, like a click method, because we want that array to exist when we open up the application. And then if we do anything when we click the button to change anything within that array, we're not like recreating that array from scratch. So the array is created when the application opens, and then when the user clicks the button, we actually do something with that array. Declare and create an array of doubles, size 11. Declare and create outside of the click method as best practice. Okay. Now, if we wanted to assign some values to that array, we just use the subscript in the square bracket. So if we wanted if I as the teacher wanted the quiz score, so I don't know why that capitalized. Oh, because it's the same name as my class. Um, okay, so if I wanted to assign a value to the first element of quiz scores, I would simply type the name of the array, and then the subscript in brackets, and then give it a value. No, I'm not going to actually do that. That was just to show you an example, but that's not where we're actually headed with this example. Let me jump back to the slides. Okay, default values. So if you don't initialize an array, which I'm going to show you how to do in just a second, but if you declare and create the array, but don't assign values to the elements, like we've done so far in our example application, then it gives those elements some default values. So numerical fields are set to 0. So right now, our array of quiz scores is a list of 11 double variables, each assigned a value of 0. Character fields are set to null, and Boolean fields are set to false by default. Now, an initializer list is the list of values provided for an array. So if you don't want to start with an empty array, if you want to give it specific values at the time you declare and create your array, you can put those inside of curly braces directly following the creation of the array. And I've also given you some shortcuts. You can do those if you're comfortable with creating an array, but I'm just, in my examples, going to use the explicit way to initialize an array, which is to have the data type followed by brackets, followed by the array name. Then you use the new keyword. I repeat the the data type, and then in brackets, put the number of elements in that array. And then in curly braces, you put a list separated by commas of the values that you want to have in that array. And I will do this for the quiz scores examples, but first I just want to mention that you can't technically change the size of an array after you've created it. You can create a new array and assign it the same variable name, but this will overwrite or reset the values of the array. So in this example, if you had an array of doubles called sales and then you assign it a value, then even though this variable is already declared, we don't have to declare it again. But if we assign it a new double array object, now that's erased the values that were in the elements of that array. Okay, and so the power of arrays becomes apparent when you use subscripts that are variables rather than constant values. So I will show an example of this over in our quiz scores application. Okay, so let's say in this case, I've just created an empty array. This example also initializes the array with values, okay? So this is completely valid and normal, and I mean, there's plenty of applications all the time where you would create an empty array, and then you might have the user like input a value for each element of that array, or in other cases, you can initialize it with a beginning set of values, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'm just going to say, okay, for some specific user, their quiz scores for those 11 quizzes were 9, 10, 9.5, 8, 7, 9, 10, 8.5, 9.5. How many do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so I just came up with random numbers off the top of my head. So now this array called quiz scores is a list of 11 double variables, the first of which is 9, the second of which is 10, and so forth. So now in the click button, if the user wanted to see a specific score of quiz, we can create a new variable. We'll just call it score. And let's say that we wanted the score variable to have the value of the first quiz. So then we could type the array name and in brackets list 0. And because the first element in this array has a value of 9, then this expression represents, at this point in time, the value of 9. So now this variable called score, which is independent from the array, has a value of 9. Okay, but what I was mentioning on the last slide is instead of hard coding which number, let's say that we want to let the user input which score they want to see. Okay, so we had put a text box on our application called, sorry, just want to make sure I do this right, the quiz score text box. So here, instead of explicitly typing that we want element number 0, we can say that we want the quiz number text box text. Okay, but we have to convert that to an integer. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff on one line. Let me separate it into 2 lines. Just so I make sure that you all understand what I'm doing here, okay? So I'm going to comment this out, and then I'm going to redo this, re-explain it on 2 separate lines of code. Okay, so let's say, first of all, that we want to get which quiz number the user wants to see the score for. So that we can get from our text box and convert that to an integer. So you should all understand this line of code. So we've done this 100 times. Okay, we're just getting what the user input into that text box, converting it to an integer, and assigning that to this variable that I've called quiz number. Okay. Then we can take that and save it as a double variable. So now here we can declare a double variable called score, and we can have that be this element of this array. So if the user had input 1, I want to see my score for quiz number 1, then this will access element number 1 of the quiz scores array. Now, because array elements, like everything else in programming, starts from 0 instead of 1, it's actually off by 1, and we want to subtract 1. So if the user inputs the number 1, then we're going to get element 0 from our array as the score for that quiz. If the user inputs quiz number 11, then we're going to get element number 10, which is the last element of that array, and save it as a score. Then we can display that score in a label. Oh, let me just fix my one line of code. So this would be -1. Okay, that is a lot on one line of code. I'm glad that I broke that down into 2. So here we get the quiz number from the user, and here we use that quiz number as a subscript of our array. So we have an array that has 11 different scores in it. We refer to an individual element of that array by putting a number inside of these square brackets. So the number that we've input inside these square brackets is whatever number the user input -1. Then we can display that in a label. So our output label text could be your score on that quiz was, and then the score. Now I will test that. Debug menu, start without debugging. So if the user inputs, they want to see quiz 1, then the application says your score on that quiz was 9, which was the first element in that array. If the user says number 11, then the application will access element number 10, which is the last element of an array of size 11. Say 10. If we say 12, then it gives us an error because there is no element number 11 of our array. We created an array of size 11. So that's numbered 0 through 10, which is 11 elements.